the roaring 20s, the divorce rate was 15%, a slight increase over the previous decade. And instead of simply pointing fingers at post-war problems, flappers, and the women's movement, though feminists did continue to shoulder a lot of the blame, efforts were made to try and curb divorces. In an article from the August 25, 1920 edition of the California-based Riverside Daily Press, the announcement was made that a Mrs. Irene L. Luce had successfully divorced from her husband, Oscar B. Luce, despite the many efforts the United States were using to stop an influx of divorces. In a letter to the Riverside Daily Press, Mrs. Luce had this to say: "I can't be bothered with a husband. I intend to live a fast life, die young, and be a beautiful corpse." Now I bring this up because in the 1960s, pop culture was inundated with a new genre of music, teenage tragedy songs, also known as tearjerkers, death discs, or splatter platters, as just a few examples of nicknames of the genre coined by DJs. Songs in which they lived a fast life, died young, and left beautiful corpses. All that to say, welcome to
Splatter Platter September.
We kick it off with arguably the most popular of them all, the Shangri-Las 1964 heartbreaking hit,
Leader of the pack.
Hello to all you leather-clad lovers out there, and welcome back to Heard It in a Love Song, the show where we take a look into the history of a love song we all know and love. My name is Richard Hunt, and this week we are diving into a girl group with a number of bangers, one of which is currently one of the most popular songs on the app TikTok, but more on that later. We start our story this time around in the early 1960s, in the Cambria Heights neighborhood of Queens, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. Queens in the 60s was bustling. Candy stores on every corner, mom-and-pop delis, delivery trucks that would come to sell you grocery goods straight to your door. Ice cream trucks doled out cold treats, and record parties were all the rage. You would charge the kids a dime to get in, break out the soda, and stack your 45s on the old RCA Victrola, and just dance or stare at the girl you wanted to dance with, hoping she would get the message. There was a method to the madness of charging the kids to get in, as it would give you the money to buy more records, and to thusly have more parties. It was a great time to grow up, sure, but don't let the candy, ice cream, and music pull the wool over your eyes. Queens was far from Disneyland. Whether you were a guy or a girl growing up at that time, you had to be streetwise, and at times stand tough on your ground. If not, you'd be walked all over. It was not uncommon to have small groups of kids, some gangs, and some just neighborhood kids, dividing up the blocks into territories. There was the usual mischief, but nothing as drastic by today's standards, but still enough that you would want to stand up and call anyone's bluff. With all this said, I think you should have a good grasp on the area where the Shangri-Las grew up in. The girls who comprised the Shangri-Las came from average American families who settled into the area, and as with all parents, theirs only wanted to give their children the best that they could. So let's meet those families. The Ganser family had 2 of the 4 original members of the Shangri-Las by means of identical twins, Marguerite, Marge, or Margie, and Mary Ann Ganser, born on February 4th, 1948.
Come and play with us, Daddy.
Growing up, the twins were instilled with a great love for music. Mrs. Ganser had been a fan of music much of her life, and for a while she was a vocalist in nightclubs around the area and was also very talented at the piano. She had the capability of hearing a tune, then going to the piano and playing it by ear. When their daughters showed interest in learning the piano, Mr. and Mrs. Ganser, with 5 mouths to feed,
Hey man, I got 5 kids to feed.
found a way to stretch their already strained income from the tuition at Sacred Heart parochial school. Now, I cannot find the price of tuition in the 1960s, but for 4 children, it comes out to $23,200. And regardless of that, they were able to sign both girls up for lessons. For 7 years, they faithfully practiced and learned the ins and outs of theory, composition, and the like, becoming excellent players in the end. Mary Ann, not being satisfied with just playing the piano, took the theory and basics she learned from her lessons and applied them to mastering the guitar, which she accomplished and played quite well. Through the years of lessons, practice, and training, the girls also managed to keep up their grades at Sacred Heart, cementing the fact that these girls were definitely striving for perfection. Meanwhile, a block over, we meet up with the Weiss family and the additional 2 original members. Mary Weiss, born on December 28, 1948, and her older sister, Elizabeth Betty Weiss, born November 27, 1946. Now, as luck would have it, all 4 girls, at different time periods, since they varied in age about a year from each other, started attending Andrew Jackson High School. During the 1963 to 1964 school year, the Weiss and Ganser sisters started becoming very good friends, and in the process found they all shared the same love for music. Whether in school or at the Ganser or Weiss household, or hanging out with Mary and Betty's older brother George and his friends, they would practice the popular songs of the day, working on their harmonies, routines, and presence, the girls taking any constructive criticism in stride to better their act. Enthusiastic and upbeat about their singing, but also realistic in their expectations of making it big, they forged on to the point where their harmonies blended perfectly. Not satisfied with just singing in the neighborhood, they started to play local record hops and dances, with George Weiss nearby keeping a watchful eye on them. During the days of the local dances and hops, the girls were also brought to the attention of a producer around the area named Artie Ripp. Now let's talk a little bit about Artie Ripp. Ripp began his career as a singer, initially harmonizing rock and roll songs with friends from high school. In 1957, he formed an official singing group with the Neighborhood Friends, and the group was signed by ABC Paramount Records as backup singers for ABC solo artists. The singers sang backup for Paul Anka on his 1957 hit Diana. I broke up shortly thereafter, but not happy with leaving the music business altogether, he shifted from performing to being behind the scenes in the music business. About his potential as a performer, he stated, "I sucked. I was no Elvis Presley."
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Functioning as a manager instead of a performer, he put together the New York vocal group The Temptations. Not that Temptations. In 1964, Ripp, with Hai Mizraha and Phil Steinberg, founded Kama Sutra, initially an independent production company based in New York. As a production house, the company established a consistent and impressive track record in the singles market, with critics saying that Kama Sutra hit immediately and often. They would go on to work with artists like the Fat Boys, the Charlie Daniels Band, and after hearing and seeing the girls perform live, having no band name at the time, he recognized their potential and signed them to an exclusive contract with Kama Sutra Productions. The signing would be a blessing, for the fact that it reassured the girls of their talent. It also proved detrimental, as that contract would resurface later on, almost putting an end to their career before it got a chance to take off. But more on that later. Most likely the very first recording that the girls did was at one of their local club performances with a tune called Simon Says, a sort of hybrid between Bo Diddley and Willie and the Hand Jive. Even though this may have been their first waxing of a track, it would not be released until almost a year or so later. Once the Wishing Well sessions were finished and mastered, Artie Ripp started shopping them around. And call it fate or whatever you would like to call it, the tracks released to Spokane Records, a subsidiary of Florence Greenberg's Scepter/Wand record company. Scepter and Wand had artists like the Isley Brothers, the Kingsmen, and the Shirelles. Wishing Well was released in early 1964 and made some noise regionally, but nothing to speak of nationally. The girls, not discouraged that the record didn't hit big, but having this notch in their belt and some street cred in the local club scene, forged ahead with their area performances and also their scholastic duties, not knowing what fate had in store for them.
Ladies and gentlemen, once
in early 1964, the U.S. music scene exploded with the arrival of the Beatles and their counterparts, who virtually obliterated many of the U.S. vocalists and groups that were riding high just before their invasion. Just about everyone was taking a hit on the charts, with the exception of three areas: Detroit with the Motown sound, California with the surfing sound, and New York with the songs of the Brill Building. The Brill Building at this point was unstoppable, turning out hit after hit from many independent labels, including the hot new label of 1964, Redbird Records. Team Redbird at this time was comprised of owners Jerry Lieber, Mike Stoller, and George Goldner, and engineers and arrangers Brooks Arthur, Tommy Dowd, and Artie Butler. Batting 1,000 were the writing and production husband and wife team Elliot Greenwich and Jeff Barry. All of the people there at this time had reams of experience in the industry. Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller wrote and produced hits like Jailhouse Rock by Elvis Presley, Love Potion No. 9 by the Clovers,
Love Potion No. 9.
Stand By Me by Benny King,
Darling, darling, stand by me.
and I Keep Forgetting by Chuck Jackson,
I keep forgetting you don't love me no more.
which would later be covered by Michael McDonald,
I keep forgetting we're not in love anymore.
and with that version being used as the basis of Regulate by Warren G and Nate Dogg,
Regulator!
Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller received songwriting credits for that song as well. But Manhattan wasn't the only musical hub on the East Coast. There were also things stirring out in Long Island. At this point in the 1960s, Long Island to many was considered the true suburbs of New York. But with its housing developments, strip malls, and shopping centers, it was also home, at one time, to future songwriting powerhouse Ellie Greenwich. She would play the piano, sing, and jam at local get-togethers with friends from high school, the neighborhood, and the like. It was at one of these gatherings that she met a transplant from Brooklyn, George Shadow Morton. There was nothing spectacular about the meeting, and some time would go by before they would meet up again. In the early part of 1964, George Morton was talking with a friend of his, and the conversation steered its way to Ellie Greenwich and her newfound fame. George's friend went on to inform him that the girl who used to be at the Long Island parties was now a professional songwriter. He named some of the tunes Ellie had co-written. Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals,
And then he kissed me.
Be My Baby by the Ronettes, and Chapel of Love by the Dixie Cups.
Going to the chapel of love.
Now, these songs must have piqued George's curiosity, and so he decided to get a hold of her. Ellie and her husband Jeff, now part of the staff at Redbird, set up a meeting with George at their offices. After the meeting, something between Jeff and George just didn't click. They exchanged some verbal banter between each other, and it got to the point where Jeff asked him just what he did for a living. George quipped back at Jeff that he wrote songs for a living, and naturally, Jeff had to ask what kind of songs, whereas George replied nonchalantly, hit songs. Jeff called his bluff and asked him to write one and bring it back to the offices within a week. George's reply was, do you want a slow one or a fast one? Jeff asked him to do a slow one. But not satisfied with just writing a song, the Shadow wanted to find a way for a band to perform it as well. He managed to get a friend of his to hook him up with a studio in Bethpage, Long Island, where he had previously tooled around with some recording. Soon, a little bird got the word to him of a group of girls from Queens who were performing on the local club circuit. It was the Weiss and Ganser sisters, now known as the Shangri-Las, lifting the name from a popular Chinese restaurant in the South Jamaica neighborhood of Queens. And upon seeing them perform, he too saw some potential, and after some convincing, the girls agreed to come to the Bethpage studio to record. With the undeniable delicious feeling that is doing something completely out of spite, George took off for the studio to meet up with the girls, only to realize that he had forgotten a very important element in his mission to be petty. He had the band, sure, but he forgot to write the song, so he pulled his Buick over to the side of the road and wrote one of the most haunting love songs ever to be penned. Remember, parentheses, Walking in the Sand. It would be decades later that the song would find a new audience by means of TikTok. Video, George released the kraken that was Remember, parentheses, Walking in the Sand, on the girls and the musicians, one of which was a 15-year-old Billy Joel.
Coincidence? I think not.
With George telling them what and when to play and sing. In a 1987 interview with Q Magazine, Billy Joel explained, I met a guy at an Echoes gig. I was 15 and he asked me if I wanted to go play piano on a recording. So I go down to this little studio in a guy's basement in Levittown, Long Island, Dynamic Studios, and they've got this sheet music down there. There's two songs. One's called Leader of the Pack, and the other one is called Remember, Walking in the Sand. And this is some pretty easy stuff to play. And then Shadow comes in. He's a pretty strange guy, Shadow. He's wearing this big cape and dark glasses, and he played the producer role to the hilt. I think he had a thing about Phil Spector.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
He wanted to be the Phil Spector of the East Coast, and he talked in these wild, dramatic, theatrical terms. He wanted more thunder. He wanted more purple in the record. He's waving his arms in the air saying, give me more purple. And I'm sitting there kind of nervous. This is my first time ever in a recording studio, and I'm hissing to the other musicians, what does that mean? How do I play purple? And the guitar player leans over and says, oh, just play louder, kid. So we did these songs in a couple of hours, and the singers didn't actually sing with us. We just did the backing tracks. And I was never really sure who it was for. And then I heard, Remember, parentheses, Walking in the Sand, by the Shangri-Las on the radio, and I went, wait a minute, that's me. And the guys in the band said, oh, what did you get paid? I didn't get paid anything. What did I know? I guess Shadow pulled in guys like me so he could save some money. With the song finished, George brought it to the Redbird offices, not really knowing what to expect. And to his surprise, they loved the song, although the 7-minute playing time was a bit too long, which is a problem that the last song of
Splatter Platter September.
will ride the motorcycle right over. They signed him onto their staff, and their first request was that he go into the studio and recut the song. But since they also liked the sound of the group that did it, they wanted to sign the girls to a contract with the label. A reworking of Remember was cut and about to be promoted when things came to a screeching halt. Much like Leslie Howe getting an out-of-court settlement due to Alanis Morissette breaching contract, Artie Ripp came a-calling, and he wanted what was his. Some negotiations and concessions were made between the powers that be at Redbird and Artie. In addition, Kama Sutra was given recognition in the form of production credits on the label. In the late summer of 1964, Remember, parentheses Walking in the Sand, became a juggernaut, rising to the number 5 position nationally and the number 1 position in quite a few markets. George Morton, when asked how they got the Seagulls sound for the record, as many people assumed that they were taped on a beach, answered in just 3 words: sound effects record. With the first real chance at a hit record, these 4 girls from Queens gave the Beatles and many others who ruled the charts at this time some pretty stiff competition. Because of the rising popularity of Remember, the girls had to hit the road to promote it. Again, things almost came to a halt. Betty, who was not thrilled about traveling and having personal commitments that required her to stay close to home, would not be touring with the girls. She would, however, still sing on the records, but for now would be somewhat of a ghost member. The Shangri-Las then became such an instant sensation that they were still in school when taking the stage with the likes of James Brown, who actually had no idea the girls were white and had assumed they were black, and was very surprised when they showed up to open for him. And they opened for the Rolling Stones as well. Another act that the Shangri-Las rubbed shoulders with was the shirtless grandpa of punk, Iggy Pop, with him saying, "My cover band, the Iguanas, had a professional engagement that summer that we graduated high school at a teen club called the Ponytail in northern Michigan. They served cokes and a lot of big acts came through. I got to play drums behind the Shangri-Las, the Crystals, the Four Tops. I learned a lot." One of, if not the first, TV appearances for the Shangri-Las was on the Clark Race Show out of Pittsburgh. They performed at numerous dances and signed on for the Murray the K Show. The early appearances had them attired in matching blouses and skirts. Sometimes they'd wear sequined shell tops, and other times with pixie-collared blouses and ribbon ties, much like the Young Rascals, almost 1 full year before the Rascals hit it big with Good Lovin'. But this was about to change very soon.
Is she really going out with him? Well, there she is. Let's ask her.
Remember was riding the charts, and a follow-up was needed soon, so George Morton, along with Ellie and Jeff, had an idea for one. There was some bickering about the proposed track, a tune called Leader of the Pack, as the record company feared that either no one would play it or it may cause some backlash. To top things off, George, now fully going by his nickname of Shadow, wanted a different group he discovered on Long Island called the Bunnies, also known as the Goodies, to record the song. The powers at Redbird gave a hell no to the no, hell to the no to the Bunnies. And with this in mind, and not giving up on Leader of the Pack, Shadow decided to get the Shangri-Las and do the track on the sly. His idea may have been, if the song was laid down as planned, there would be no way for Lieber and Stoller to refuse to release it. On a hot July day in 1964, Shadow booked the studio Ultrasonic Sound, located on the 2nd floor of a Manhattan hotel. He had the girls show up, and he also had a surprise. Possibly because no sound effects were available, or because no one thought of it, an idea was struck at how to get them. Believe it or not, a motorcycle was driven through the lobby of the hotel and up to the floor of the recording studio. And of course, the police were summoned. As Shadow had conveyed in the summer of 2001, the officers who came out on call were absolutely stunned at his stunt. No one was arrested, but a ticket was issued. He was told to do his session and then get that motorcycle out of there. They didn't care how, but they didn't want him to drive it through the hotel lobby again. Shadow didn't recall how they got it out of there, but somehow they managed. Of course, this little bit of history is debated, as even Mary Weiss says it was a sound effect record. And while the rumor is that Billy Joel played piano on Leader of the Pack, much like the motorcycle sound effect, there are a few different accounts as to what actually happened. Some say it was Roger Rossi, a staff musician for Ultrasonic Recording Studios at the time. In 2007, Tony Visconti wrote the pianist Artie Butler played on the track, and Billy Joel claims it was him, so who knows. So now we have a song that was not supposed to be recorded, a group that was not set to record it, and a motorcycle that wasn't supposed to be where it was. And with all of this, it's a miracle that the recording session ever got off the ground. Forging ahead, everyone, especially the girls, came through like troopers with vocals and harmonies that could not be equaled and no one else could have done. However, an alternate take does exist, wherein Betty Weiss sings lead, hence the twins referring to the main character in the song as Betty.
I met him at the candy store. He turned around and smiled at me. You get the picture?
With the session done, the master was taken back to Redbird and scheduled for release. The wheels of popularity were in motion, and soon the girls were on the rounds of TV show appearances. However, Leader of the Pack was refused airplay at some radio stations. It was banned in parts of the UK. With all this, Leader of the Pack broke out and shot up the charts, reaching number 1 in no time at all, even passing the current Beatles entry, Matchbox, and knocking the Supremes' Baby Love out of the number 1 spot. In an interview with Mary Weiss, she said, "They may have bought the Supremes, but they listened to us in secret. We can never do Baby Love, but the Supremes couldn't do Leader of the Pack." With the tremendous popularity of Leader of the Pack, the girls were booked on the TV show I've Got a Secret during October 1964. The show was set up so a skit would be done where Robert Goulet, Bess Meyerson, and Betsy Palmer, yes, that Betsy Palmer,
Jason was my son, and today is his birthday.
The girls were brought out on stage, and Robert Goulet donned a motorcycle get-up and mounted a cycle on the stage. Betty was still not appearing with the group at the time, so Mary was on the left of the stage singing to Goulet, while Margie and Mary Ann did the backgrounds to the right, including taking Betty's part and lip-syncing to it. For the show, the girls still dressed as they previously did, with skirts, blouses, and heels. But after Leader of the Pack took off, the team at Redbird went about changing the girls' image to suit the song. A photo shoot was done for publicity stills and album covers with Mary, Margie, and Mary Ann donning skin-tight slacks, spiked heel leather boots, and puffy white blouses and vests. Thus began their bad girl image, an image which fits, considering that many consider the Shangri-Las to be punk before punk was a thing. Mary Weiss, in an interview with Far Out magazine, said, "The jukebox at CBGB had a lot of Shangri-La cuts on it, and I was amazed and deeply touched when Joey Ramone told me that we had a big influence on them." Because of their popularity, the girls found themselves performing on the rock and roll circuit with groups like Jan and Dean, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Supremes, the Byrds, etc. On one of these tours, someone had attempted to break in Mary Weiss's hotel room, prompting her to start carrying a gun with her on tours. In an interview with Norton Records, she said, "I did purchase a gun once, a little Derringer. I bought a gun after somebody tried to break into my hotel room. There were these big glass panels on the side of the door, and all of a sudden I see this arm coming through. Not only was I scared to death, but there were large amounts of money in the room. You're on the road with no protection. But I was a little kid. I didn't know. Back then, you could walk in anywhere and buy a gun. But the FBI came to my mother's house and said, 'Will you please tell your daughter she'll be arrested if she gets off the plane with her gun?' We had just finished a tour in Florida, and I turned it in at the police station down there." At this time, they were also a favorite on what was known as the R&B circuit, appearing with acts like the Drifters, the Coasters, and James Brown. And to illustrate the girls' mass appeal, they were deemed the #1 new vocal group of 1964 by one of the leading music trade papers at the time, Cashbox Magazine, in the R&B category. This song has been covered many times by a wider range of artists, including Twisted Sister, the Chipmunks, Runaway singer Sherry Curry teamed up with the Stooges guitarist James Williamson to release their version in 2019.
That's when I fell for the leader of the pack.
Also in 2019, the song was introduced to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame under the new singles category that was created in 2018. The song appeared in a Broadway musical based on the songs of Ellie Greenwich, Leader of the Pack, which opened in 1985. And in 1990, the song was used in the Martin Scorsese film Goodfellas, as was Remember Walking in the Sand. A parody version of the song, Our Leader is Lurpak, was used in a Claymation TV advertisement for Lurpak butter in the UK. I do intend on doing another episode on the Shangri-Las, so we will cut it here. But I do want to mention what I feel is the canonical follow-up to Leader of the Pack, the equally devastating, if not more so, I Can Never Go Home Anymore.
And I can never go home anymore.
Wherein the main character runs away and never goes back home, forgetting about the boy and instead remembering how good her mom was to her. The song ending with the death of her mother, as explained with the line, "Don't do to your mom what I did to mine. She grew so lonely, and in the end, angels picked her for a friend, and I can never go home anymore." Leader of the Pack comes in at 120 beats per minute. Leader of the Pack is just one of these emotionally raw songs. That is due in large part to the voice of Mary Weiss, who, along with Mandy Moore and Six from Blossom, were my first childhood crushes. As far as teen tragedy songs go, Leader of the Pack is my favorite. It's dark and tense, and carries with it this impending sense of doom. We've all been in a relationship that has had outside forces working against it, and this song is the perfect and most deadly example of that.
I'll never forget him, the leader of the pack.
This week's love homework is another splatter platter, yet a very obscure one. Bare Naked Ladies, Tonight is the Night I Fell Asleep at the Wheel.
Tonight is the night I fell asleep at the wheel.
If you like what you learned this week, please go ahead and drop a like down below. If you'd like to continue learning, consider subscribing. I drop a video every Friday. And ring that bell if you'd like to be notified about the next video I release. Until next time, my name is Richard Hunt, and you heard it in a love song.
That's when I fell for the leader.